In today's video, I am reviewing the technical specifications of the Canon R5 mirrorless full-frame camera body. Now, this video is a little different than all of my other honest review videos that I've made in the past on my channel because I've actually never used this camera body before. The reason why I'm making this video is because I'm actually learning about the Canon R5 to see if it is a type of camera body that I eventually do want to purchase and use within my business. I'm learning about this camera body just as much as you are when you're watching this video. So I have done research on this camera body, a whole bunch of the technical specifications. So that's really what this particular YouTube video is about. It's really not a review of me using the camera body in my business. However, if I do get that camera someday, then I will definitely make an honest review video on the Canon R5 if I choose to get that and use that within my business. But I kind of just wanted to let you know that I've actually never used this camera body before, and everything I'm talking about in today's video I've just learned from researching this particular camera body. So let's get right into learning some technical specifications of the Canon R5. Number one is, what is the weight of the Canon R5? The weight of the Canon R5, including the battery, CF Express card, but without the body cap, is going to be 26.03 ounces. Now the weight of the Canon R5 without anything else on it is 22.93 ounces. So I would say about 1.5 pounds, so not that bad at all. Pretty light, pretty nice compact camera, and that's mainly because it is a mirrorless camera body, so it has less moving parts inside, which makes it lighter. So for number two, I'm going to do kind of a quick rundown of a whole bunch of the tech specs that I've kind of just like briefly learned about. So first of all, it has really high image quality capabilities it has a 45 megapixel full frame CMOS sensor, and I've actually talked about this 45 megapixel sensor in I think my Canon R6 Mark II video. The 45 megapixel, that actually is what drew me to this camera body because I kind of am weirdly obsessed with megapixels. I just like big high resolution images. I just think it's so cool. That's how many megapixels this camera has. And then it also has a Digic X image processor with an ISO range of 100 to 51,200, but it can be expandable up to 102,400. It also has high-speed continuous shooting of up to 12 frames with the mechanical shutter, or it can do 20 frames per second with the electronic silent shutter. And I will talk more in depthly about each of these things kind of throughout the video, so keep watching and just kind of learn more about all these tech specs that I'm talking about. It also has dual pixel CMOS autofocus 2 covering approximately 100% area with 1,053 autofocus areas. That is insane, let me just say that. And then it also has subject tracking of people and animals using deep learning technology. So I think this is where mirrorless camera bodies start to shine. Like, the autofocus tracking capabilities have just become really amazing. Another really cool thing about this camera body is that it can film in 8K RAW, 4K, and Full HD up to 120 frames per second, which is crazy. And then it can do 10-bit, 4:2:2 with Canon log. It can also do Canon log 3 or HDR PQ. It can do internal recording in all formats, and then with autofocus. So that's just a brief rundown of some like quick tech specs for you today. Hey there, I'm Jennifer Cook, and this channel is a place where we like to create helpful information for photographers and business owners to help them grow their business over the years. We'd like to bring you into our journey and just kind of tell you what we're thinking about, what we're doing. And so that's really what we post about on this channel. So we just wanted to thank you for being here. We appreciate your support, and we really try to make more helpful content for you. So if there's something you'd like to see on this channel, please write it in the comments. That way I can add it to my list of videos to make for you. Again, if you like the content of this video so far, go ahead and like this video and also subscribe to our channel. That helps us know that you like these videos that we're making and that you want us to do more. Again, it really helps us to know what you like and what you don't like. That way we can really hone this channel to be helpful and informational to you. So go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and then we're gonna jump right back into this video because I know that you're very curious to learn more about the Canon R5. Number three is, what are the uses of the Canon R5? So it can obviously be used for both video and photo. Again, we've talked about how it has a really high megapixel count, which means really high image quality for photographers. And then for videographers, I recently learned that it can actually film up to 8K 30 frames per second on this camera body, which is just crazy that a Canon camera can do that. That's just amazing. Number 4 is what are the card slots that the Canon R5 has. It has one CF Express card Type B card slot, and then it has one SD card slot. So I'll be honest, when I found out that it had a CF Express card slot, I was like, oh, like they're more expensive, they're not my favorite. But then when I further looked into the CF Express card, the reason it has this is because the CF Express card can record like crazy intense stuff. So like for example, one of these cards I was looking at on Amazon, it can read up to 1700 megabytes per second, and it can write up to 1200 megabytes per second. I think they've, made these CF Express cards specifically for these camera bodies that are recording up to like 8K. Like it needs that write speed, or else it cannot record fast enough. So that is why the CF Express cards, that's why one of these has to go in the camera body, and then I'm assuming that you would have to use a very fast SD card in camera body. I'm gonna say that if you are filming up to 8K, you do need like really fast cards in there, and that would be like highly important. Now, if you're only filming HD or maybe even 4K, you might not need as fast of cards, but I would still suggest getting as fast of cards as you can, just to ensure that your camera can keep up with recording and the photos that are being taken. Number 5 is what is the mount type of the Canon R5? So it has an RF mount, which means that you need to put RF lenses on this camera body. Now you can also get an RF mount to EF mount adapter, which you like screw on to your camera body. That way you can put EF lenses onto your RF camera body, and I do that like a lot, to be honest, on my Canon R6 Mark II. Number 6 is what's the image sensor like on this camera body? So it has a CMOS sensor, which I kind of already briefly talked about. And again, it has 45 megapixels. That's what it can take up to. And then it uses the RGB color space. Number 7 is what is the cost of this lens? So on Canon, it is going to be $2,999. And it's actually $400 off right now than it used to be, so that's pretty cool. Now I just did a quick search on Amazon, and you can actually find a Canon R5 renewed camera body for $2,474. So basically another $500 off. So if that's something that you want to look into, getting a used version of this camera body, then you could also do that through Amazon. Number 8 is let's talk about the video recording capabilities that this camera has. First of all, it can record in as high up to 8K 30 frames per second, which is absolutely insane that it can do that. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's one of the first cameras by Canon that can do this, but also I'm not entirely sure if that's correct. So it may be correct, but also might not be correct, but it's definitely one of like the best camera bodies that Canon has made for the price so far. It can record in 4K, full HD. It also has Canon Log and Canon Log 3. Now let me go into a little more specifics on the video recording capabilities and its heat limitations. All right, so it looks like that it can record at 8K 30 frames per second for about 20 minutes, and then it could potentially overheat. So definitely not very long in 8K 30 frames per second, but just the fact that it can record in that format is crazy. It can record in 4K 120 frames per second, but that has a limit of 15 minutes. So basically you have to be careful with that. And then 4K 60 frames per second, you can do upwards of 35 minutes or 25 minutes. It's depending on which, exactly like if you're using crop or not without crop, things like that. And then it can do 4K 30 frames per second for upwards of 30 minutes, but then there are some settings in here in which is not limited by heat. So I'm going to include a picture of this chart that I'm looking at right now. That way you can really understand like when it's limited by heat and when it's not limited by heat when filming. I think it's really important to understand what your camera can do. That way you can prepare for such situations. Number 9 is shooting speed. So I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier in the video, but it has a high-speed continuous shooting mode up to 12 frames per second when you're using the mechanical shutter, and then it can also do 20 frames per second when you're using the electronic shutter, which is actually silent. Number 10 is the autofocus types and the methods. So it has dual pixel CMOS autofocus. It also has face tracking autofocus. It has spot autofocus, has 1-point autofocus. It has expand autofocus area, which apparently is like above, below, left, right, and around. And then also has zone autofocus, and lastly, large area autofocus, which is vertical, horizontal. So again, just so many different autofocus settings and methods. And honestly, I have not even begun to test these out and figure them out yet. But someday when I do, I'll make a video about the specific autofocus methods and just everything they can do. Number 11 is what is the battery compatibility of the Canon R5. So it can use an LP-E6NH battery. It can also use LP-E6M battery or an LP-E6 battery. And I will try to include links to all those in the description of this video and show you what those are so that you can make sure you're getting the correct battery for the camera body. Number 12 is what is the working temperature range for the Canon R5? And this is really important so you make sure you don't film in, whether it's too cold or too hot, especially if you're in the south and it's like really hot and gets over 100 degrees, you gotta be careful. So its working temperature range is 32 degrees Fahrenheit to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. So just make sure you're keeping an eye on the weather when you're shooting with it so you don't accidentally murder your camera. Number 13 is what is the working humidity of the Canon R5? So it is 85% or less, which means that if you know the humidity is going to be over 85%, you might need to rethink taking your camera out in the humidity so that you don't kill it. Number 14 is the LCD monitor. And so it's touchscreen, which again, huge perk. I love touchscreen camera bodies. They're so much easier to use. But a really fun fact about this camera body is that you can adjust the brightness like on this camera body, and it actually has up to 7 different brightness levels. And I just learned this, and I just think it's really cool because let's say that you're out photographing wedding day and you're taking photos and it's so bright outside, but your camera screen's really dark. This happens to me so much where I struggle to actually see my camera screen because of how bright it is outside, but then how dark my camera screen is. If you can turn up the brightness on your camera screen, that's huge. I love that, it's so cool. So definitely a huge perk of the Canon R5 that I really like and that jumped out to me. Number 15 is what are my overall thoughts on the Canon R5 full frame mirrorless camera body. So overall, I love that it has a high megapixel count of 45. I think it's really cool that it can record up to 8K 30 frames per second. However, I really don't record that high, so that's really not something that I need. But I do think that, if you're a videographer and super into producing films, video production, whatever you're doing video-wise, you might actually need 8K at some point. However, I do think that that's a lot. But I think that it is a cool perk to have, to be able to use if you are specializing in videography and you need that capability. For me, it was kind of a downside finding out that it doesn't have 2 SD card slots, but I understand why it doesn't have 2 SD card slots. They needed to have an CF express card slot because it can keep up with the write speed that the camera is producing, video or photo. Because the files are so large from this camera body, it needs a specific card to capture it and be fast enough to capture it. So I was actually really considering getting Canon R5 because I like the megapixel count. That was probably the biggest perk to me. I'm also not entirely sure yet because it only has 1 SD card slot and 1 CF express card slot. Not really sure yet, and thankfully I wasn't really planning on getting a camera body for at least another 6 months, so I still have plenty of time to figure out if I would get another Canon R6 Mark II or the Canon R5 or another camera. Who knows what I discover in the next 6 months. But I kind of just wanted to give you my honest thoughts on the tech specs from just looking at the online tech specs of this camera body. And I do believe that I might not need such fast writing capability cards to put in the camera if I'm truly only just taking photos and videos. So if I'm just taking photos and then only taking upwards of HD or 4K video, then I might not actually need such high recording cards, if you kind of understand. I talked about it in this video. I could still use this camera body, but just not get the super crazy expensive cards, but just get what I need that works for what I'm doing. But you'd also want to test out those specific cards to make sure that it does write fast enough when you're shooting photo or video or whatever you're doing. You don't want to be in a situation where it's not writing to the card fast enough. That would be so bad and really sad and just not good. So I'm gonna be honest that I'm still undecided on whether or not I actually want to purchase the Canon R5, but I'm hoping that maybe this video helps you to at least understand more about camera body to help you determine if this is a camera body you want to get or you want to think about getting in the future. Just wanted to make this to just be helpful and try to help you learn more about it. Now, I recently discovered something really epic in Lightroom. So if you want to know what that epic thing that I discovered in Lightroom is, then that video is next.